My name is Elena Hartman, and 3 months ago, my own family told me they were too embarrassed to attend my basic little wedding. They skipped it without hesitation. But what they didn't know was that my husband and I had secretly built a breathtaking ceremony at my $5.5 million mountain estate, a wedding so stunning. It ended up broadcast live on local TV, with the whole town watching, including them. An hour later, my father texted, "Family meeting. 8 p.m. Urgent." And that was the night everything changed. Have you ever been dismissed by your own family? Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is. I want to see how far this story reaches. I grew up in a quiet town in Indiana, the kind of place where people cared more about how your family looked from the outside than how anyone felt on the inside. My parents fit right into that culture. They lived for reputation, for the compliments they collected at church, for the way neighbors whispered, "What a lovely family." And because they cared so desperately about appearances, they poured everything they had: attention, praise, money, dreams into the daughter they thought reflected them best, my younger sister, Camilla. Even her name sounded like a centerpiece. Camilla was the golden girl long before any of us understood what that meant. She had the kind of beauty people stopped and stared at: big bright smile, hair that fell perfectly without effort, the confidence of someone who had never been told no. From school plays to cheer competitions to local pageants, she was always front and center, basking in the spotlight. My parents attended every event with cameras, posters, balloons, and matching shirts like she was a hometown celebrity. They didn't just love her, they curated her like a brand. I was nothing like her. While Camilla lived for attention, I lived for quiet corners. I liked sketchbooks, puzzles, architecture books from the thrift store, and the feeling of losing myself in something I could build with my own hands. I wasn't loud, flashy, or charming. I didn't sparkle the way she did. And because of that, in my parents' eyes, I didn't shine at all. It started subtly. Small jokes, offhand comments, descriptions that felt harmless until they began to shape the way I saw myself. "She's our simple one. Nothing fancy, just our basic girl. Camilla's the star, she's our future. This one prefers books." They never said it with cruelty, at least not enough for anyone else to notice. But the message was always clear: Camilla was the story. I was the background. A prop. A quiet shape standing behind the real show. Holidays made this distinction feel even sharper. Every Christmas, Camilla received a new designer dress and a full photo shoot in front of the tree. My mother would fix her hair, adjust her lipstick, position her by the fireplace, then call my father to bring his camera because our star needs good lighting. Meanwhile, I sat on the stairs with my one or two gifts, usually practical things like sweaters or notebooks, waiting for someone to remember I existed long enough to open them. They never forgot me intentionally. They simply didn't remember me deliberately. On Thanksgiving, the entire family gathered at the big table, leaving one small folding chair slightly pushed away from the center, and that seat was always mine. Camilla got the seat next to Mom, the spotlight seat, as Dad called it. I got the one near the corner, where the tablecloth drooped and no one made eye contact long enough to ask how I was doing. Even birthdays, the one day meant to celebrate you, served as another reminder of how different Camilla's world was from mine. Her parties were events. Glitter invitations, catered cupcakes, themed decorations, a rented bounce house or backyard stage. Mine were simple family nights where my mother would hand me a grocery store cake and say, "You don't like big celebrations anyway, right? You're our low-maintenance one." I was 10 when I realized they weren't describing me, they were defining me. And they expected me to play along. When I achieved anything: a ribbon in a district art contest, a high score on a design project, first place in a statewide architectural sketch competition, it barely registered. I remember one moment so vividly it still stings. I came home from school holding a certificate I had worked weeks for, something my teachers said could help me apply to a competitive summer program. I walked into the kitchen to show my parents. My mother glanced at it for 2 seconds before smiling pleasantly and saying, "Nice, sweetheart. But Camilla just got invited to model at a state event. Isn't that incredible?" Then she turned her back to me and continued chopping vegetables as if the conversation was over. My father didn't even look up from the newspaper. The certificate was still crisp, still warm from the printer, but it already felt like a useless piece of paper. I set it on the counter beside the sink and watched it get splashed with dishwater later that night. It didn't matter what I did. It didn't matter how hard I worked or how much potential teachers said I had. My achievements were footnotes, Camilla's were headlines. I didn't envy her beauty or her confidence. I envied the way my parents saw her. I envied the belief they had in her future. I envied the softness in their voices when they spoke her name. They looked at her and saw possibility. They looked at me and saw an extra. A placeholder. Someone who filled the space between Camilla's milestones. Once, when I was 12, I overheard my mother on the phone with a distant aunt who asked how both her daughters were doing. My mother laughed, not kindly, but dismissively, and said, "Oh, Camilla's flourishing as always. And the older one? Well, she's sweet. She's simple. Nothing special, but she's good at keeping herself busy." I remember standing in the hallway, holding a stack of sketches I was so proud of, and feeling something inside me collapse quietly. I wasn't hurt because she said I was simple. I was hurt because she believed it. Over time, I learned that my parents' favoritism wasn't occasional, it was a system. A structure, a family hierarchy with Camilla at the top and me somewhere near the attic, forgotten until someone needed help carrying boxes. They didn't just favor her, they shaped our entire identity around her. If Camilla wanted attention, we all stood behind her. If she wanted silence, the whole house dimmed its lights. My role was never to shine, only to make sure her spotlight stayed unobstructed. People say that children don't remember the details, they remember how things made them feel. And if I had to describe what my childhood felt like, it would be this. I was always reaching for a place at a table that wasn't set for me. Always waiting for someone to call my name in a room designed to echo only Camilla's. By the time I reached my teenage years, the quiet ache of childhood had already settled deep into my bones, but adolescence sharpened it into something colder, something that cut without ever drawing blood. If childhood was when I learned I was the background child, then my teen years were when I began to believe it. In our house, every milestone was measured by how brightly Camilla could shine, and no matter how hard I worked, how carefully I tried to build something of my own, it was always eclipsed by the simple fact that Camilla existed. Prom season was the first time I truly understood that some memories scar you not because they're loud, but because they're so silent they echo. Camilla was a sophomore when I was a senior, but to my parents, the night belonged entirely to her. They rented a white limousine for the girls, though the girls ended up meaning Camilla and whoever she wanted to bring, not me. A stylist came to the house hours early, curling her golden hair under perfect ring lights while my mother stood nearby with a camera, gasping dramatically at each new angle. I watched from the hallway. My dress hanging limply on the closet door of my room, nothing designer, nothing glamorous. Just a simple navy gown I'd bought on clearance. With money from tutoring middle school algebra. I did my own hair in the small mirror above my dresser, hands trembling, trying to convince myself I didn't care that no one had offered to help me. When I came downstairs, the house was already buzzing with excitement, music playing, glitter everywhere. I lingered near the staircase, waiting for anyone to notice me. But they were too busy fussing over Camilla, adjusting her earrings, spraying perfume, debating which filter looked best for the photos. When the limo driver knocked on the door, my mother practically squealed. "Camilla, sweetheart, time to go. Everyone's waiting to see you." In the commotion, no one even looked in my direction. I ended up driving myself to prom in my old hand-me-down sedan, the one with a crack across the windshield. At the venue, I stood in the far corner of the gym. Fairy lights shimmering overhead, pretending I didn't see Camilla sweep into the room with her entourage, cameras flashing as if she were the one graduating, not me. Someone even asked me, "Oh, are you Camilla's sister?" As if that was my whole identity. I smiled weakly and nodded. It was easier than explaining who I really was when no one seemed to care. Graduation was worse. If prom was the first deep cut, graduation was the moment the blade twisted. I had worked for years, late nights, stacks of textbooks, competitions, endless essays. When the school announced I would graduate with honors, it felt like maybe, just maybe, someone would finally see me. But when the day arrived, the auditorium wasn't filled with pride for me, it was filled with my parents live streaming Camilla. Not me. Camilla. She wasn't graduating, she was posing in the audience. My mother filmed her, adjusting her cap as a joke, my father narrating proudly about how our Camilla looks good in anything. When my name was called loudly, clearly, as one of the top students, my parents were facing the wrong direction, too busy taking selfies with my sister to notice. I walked across the stage alone, the applause sounding hollow in my ears. When I looked into the crowd, searching for their faces, all I saw was my father angling his phone so Camilla could smile into the live stream. I don't remember who handed me the medal. I don't remember shaking the principal's hand. I only remember the moment I stepped off the stage and heard my parents cheering not for me, but because Camilla had just fixed her hair and they wanted to capture it. But the deepest wound came the following summer. The day I won the state design competition. It was the biggest achievement of my life at that point, a contest so competitive that only 5 students from the entire state were even selected to compete. I worked for months on my submission, a model of a community center inspired by natural patterns, full of spaces designed for light and connection. When they announced I had won first place, I was stunned. The prize included a scholarship and an invitation to a prestigious mentorship program. I remember standing backstage after the ceremony, clutching the trophy, texting my parents excitedly to tell them they could still make it in time for photos if they hurried. They never came. Later that evening, when I walked into the house still wearing the medal, the lights were already dim, and Camilla was twirling in front of the mirror wearing a new dress. My mother glanced up and said, "Oh good, you're home." We had to take Camilla to try on gowns for her event next month. It was the only fitting time the boutique had. You understand, right? She needed us. I held the trophy a little tighter, the medal suddenly cold against my fingers. My father asked absently, "So, how'd your little thing go?" I didn't respond. I just went upstairs and placed the trophy on my desk, its shine dimmer than it had been an hour before. In that moment, something inside me cracked in a way that didn't make noise. I realized that no matter how hard I worked, no matter what heights I reached, my parents would always find a way to center Camilla. They didn't just fail to see me, they refused to. And eventually, the refusal became something I internalized. I stopped expecting them to show up. I stopped hoping they would notice. I stopped imagining they would one day say, "We're proud of you." Instead, I learned to celebrate silently, privately, in the quiet corners where I had always been pushed. Looking back, the strangest part isn't the favoritism, it's how normal it once felt. I grew accustomed to being invisible, to sitting at the edges of rooms, to watching moments that should have been mine get swallowed by Camilla's shadow. I learned how to shrink on cue, how to smile on command, how to pretend I didn't ache for what every child deserves. To be seen. To be valued, to be loved without conditions or comparisons. Those years shaped me in ways my parents never intended. They thought they were elevating Camilla, they didn't realize they were building my strength. They believed they were pushing me into the background, they didn't know I would one day use that darkness to learn how to build something entirely my own. And even though teenage me didn't know it yet, every ignored achievement, every missed milestone, every silent disappointment was setting the stage for the moment I would finally break free and become someone they could no longer overlook. By the time I left Indiana, I wasn't running toward a dream as much as I was running away from a life where I had been invisible for too long. Seattle felt like another planet compared to the flat fields and quiet streets of my hometown. The city was restless, wet, always humming with possibility. I chose it because it was far enough that no one could pop by unannounced, far enough that I could breathe, without constantly feeling Camilla's shadow cast across my life. But stepping off the plane with 2 suitcases and a scholarship letter was the first time I learned that freedom also comes with a kind of loneliness that can swallow you whole. My parents didn't help with the move. They said they were tightening the budget for Camilla's future, which was their polite way of telling me I wasn't a priority. When I hinted that I might need help buying books or basic supplies, my mother sighed dramatically and said, "Honey, you're independent. You never need much." And we have to save for Camilla, her potential is enormous. That was always the excuse. Camilla had potential. Camilla needed resources. Camilla had a big future. I, apparently, did not. So I packed my life into a pair of worn suitcases and left with nothing but scholarship money, a few $100s from tutoring, and a sinking feeling that if I fell, no one would catch me. Seattle introduced me to hardship in a way childhood never had. My first apartment wasn't really an apartment, it was a renovated attic space owned by an elderly woman who rented it for cheap because the windows didn't close all the way and the heater rattled like it had asthma. The ceiling slanted so low I couldn't stand straight in certain spots, and the first night I slept there, the rain tapped against the roof like a constant reminder that I was truly on my own. There was no room for a real bed, so I slept on a foldable cot with a thin blanket that smelled faintly of the thrift store I bought it from. I ate instant noodles almost every night, sometimes throwing in a few vegetables if I found them discounted near closing time at the grocery store. School was demanding, and rent was relentless. To survive, I stacked jobs like they were Tetris blocks threatening to topple over. In the mornings, I worked as a barista at a tiny cafe that always smelled of burnt espresso and wet jackets. My fingers were constantly blistered from steaming milk, and I learned to smile even when customers snapped at me for messing up their complicated drink orders. After classes, I walked across campus in the rain, always the rain, to a design studio where I worked as an assistant. My tasks weren't glamorous: sorting samples, taking measurements, cleaning up spilled resin from the workbenches. But I watched. I absorbed everything. Design was the one place where Camilla didn't exist, where no one compared me to a prettier, shinier version of myself. It was mine. Late at night, when the city grew quieter, I freelanced. Logos, digital sketches, architectural renders, whatever someone online was willing to pay $50 for. I worked until my eyes burned, until my wrist ached, until the sky began to lighten outside my tiny attic window. Sometimes exhaustion hit me so hard I'd fall asleep with my laptop still warm on my thighs. Other nights, hunger gnawed at me until I drank water to trick my stomach into thinking it was full. I wasn't thriving, I was surviving. But for the first time in my life, each step I took was my own. Still, even in that new world, the habits formed in childhood clung tightly to me. I kept trying quietly, hopefully to share pieces of my journey with my parents. I would send them pictures of small victories, a project model I spent days perfecting, a render my professor used as an example in class, the first logo I got paid to design. Each time, I waited for their replies the way a child waits for a light to turn on in a dark room. Sometimes hours passed, sometimes days. Most of the time, the messages remained marked as seen, but no response came. And on the rare occasions when they did answer, it was always something like, "Looks nice. Camilla just did a photoshoot for her college brochure. She looked stunning." Or, "Good job, sweetheart. Camilla might need help choosing outfits for her internship, can you call her later?" Every message was a reminder that even from hundreds of miles away, I was still the background character in a story they never bothered to rewrite. Camilla, of course, flourished on social media. My parents followed her every post with the enthusiasm of fans at a concert. They shared her college achievements, sometimes small, sometimes exaggerated with captions like, "Our star," or "So proud of this one." When I earned a merit scholarship, one semester for ranking top of my design program, I sent them a quick update only to receive a voice message from my mother saying, "We saw a beautiful photo of Camilla today, she's really becoming something special. Isn't she amazing?" Not once did they mention my scholarship. There were nights when the weight of everything, the rain, the jobs, the silence from home, felt so heavy I could barely breathe. Nights when I sat on the cold floor of my attic room, listening to the sound of thunder rolling across the sky, telling myself that one day it would be different. That one day I wouldn't just be surviving. That maybe, if I worked hard enough, I could build a life so solid, so undeniable, that no one could ever dismiss me again. But deep down, a quieter truth whispered back, they were never going to see me. Not the way I wanted, not even if I built the tallest building in Seattle with my bare hands. And that was the beginning of my real transformation, not the one marked by success or money, but the one born in silence, in hunger, in the cold walks home from work at midnight. It was the transformation that taught me to stop performing for people who would never clap, to stop sending photos to people who would never look, to stop hoping for recognition that would never come. Seattle taught me how to survive, but it wasn't until my third year there that I learned how to build. Up to that point, my life felt like a collage of exhaustion: early mornings at the cafe, long studio nights, freelance deadlines that bled into dawn. I was surviving, yes, but surviving is not the same as living. I didn't know what direction my future was supposed to take until the day I stepped into the offices of a boutique design firm specializing in luxury resorts, mountain cabins, and eco-lodges. I applied for an internship mostly out of desperation. I needed the credit hours, and I needed the money even more. I had no idea I was walking into the opportunity that would change the trajectory of my entire life. Their headquarters didn't look like a typical office. It felt more like a cross between a studio and a cabin itself: windows stretching from floor to ceiling, the scent of cedar in the air, models of hillside retreats scattered across wooden tables. I remember the way my breath caught when I first stepped inside. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't loud. It wasn't glamorous like Camilla's World. It was warm. It was thoughtful. It was the first place that felt like it made sense for someone like me. And that was where I met him, Mr. Alden Pierce, a man in his late 60s with snow-white hair, kind eyes, and the quiet authority of someone who didn't need to raise his voice to be respected. He reviewed my portfolio with such stillness that I braced myself for disappointment. Most adults who looked at my work flipped through it politely, smiling, nodding, and offering the kind of soft compliments people reserve for children who try their best but aren't expected to become anything remarkable. But Alden didn't smile politely. He leaned in. He studied every line of my sketches, every detail of my models, flipping pages slowly, thoughtfully, until I felt my heartbeat flutter with unease. Finally, he set the book down, folded his hands on top of it, and looked at me with a seriousness that made the air feel thick. "My dear," he said gently, "whoever told you you're ordinary has never seen you work." The words didn't make sense at first. I had spent so many years soaking in the idea that I was the basic one, the simple one, the forgettable one. To hear the opposite, spoken so calmly from someone whose opinion mattered, it felt like being handed a truth I wasn't allowed to accept yet. "You have the eye of a builder," he continued. "The kind of eye people are born with, not taught. Don't waste it. Not 1 ounce of it." In that moment, something inside me shifted, not a dramatic spark, but a quiet, steady ignition. Like a pilot light finally catching flame after years of being flicked at in the dark. Working under Alden was nothing like school. He didn't believe in passive mentorship. He brought me everywhere: zoning meetings, land assessments, material sourcing trips, even long drives to remote areas where new cabins would someday stand. He taught me how to read land the way other people read faces: the slope of a hill, the line of a ridge, the way water traveled, the way light changed with the seasons. "This," he said once, pointing at a barren stretch of dirt and stone, "is where people see emptiness. But you must learn to see possibility." He taught me the laws behind beauty zoning regulations: soil grading, permits, setbacks, environmental restrictions, load paths, drainage systems. He showed me how a structure needed to breathe, how forests needed respect, how homes needed intention. While Camilla chased cameras, I chased details: angles, materials, sustainability models, airflow diagrams. I fell in love not with architecture itself, but with the idea of creating spaces that could hold people's memories, heal their hearts, give them shelter in a world that often felt too loud. Bit by bit, project by project, I changed. Slowly, steadily, like stone being shaped by running water. Between classes, internships, and shifts at the cafe, I saved everything I could: tips, extra freelance payments, the occasional bonus from Alden when he saw how hard I pushed myself. My meals were still simple, my clothes still thrifted, my room still small, but something new began to grow inside me. Ambition not born from desperation, but from vision. Not to prove myself to my parents, but to prove to myself that I could build a world that didn't mirror theirs. I stopped sending photos of my projects back home. After too many unanswered messages, too many moments where my achievements were overshadowed by Camilla's latest brunch selfie or modeling opportunity. I finally understood that recognition from them was a currency they would never spend on me. Instead, I poured every piece of myself into learning, growing, and building brick by invisible brick. One night, after a long day in the studio, I sat alone at a small pier overlooking the Puget Sound. The sky was covered in silver clouds, and the ferries glided across the dark water like lanterns. I watched them, my sketchbook on my knees, and felt something I hadn't felt in years, not sadness, not hunger, not exhaustion, but clarity. I wanted to build something of my own. Not a skyscraper. Not a monument. But a home, a place where I didn't feel like a background character. A place where love wasn't rationed or compared. A place where I could breathe and belong. That was the first night the dream formed a vague, impossible image of a house surrounded by land, by mountains or trees or open sky. A place that felt like mine. At the time, it was just a fantasy scribbled in the margins of my sketchbook. Something too big for someone as small as I believed myself to be. But Alden always said that the difference between a vision and a delusion was action. So, I worked, I saved. I learned, I listened, I grew. And without knowing it, I was laying the first stones of the life that would one day shock the very people who had dismissed me because the girl they once labeled basic was already on the path to becoming the woman who would own a $5.5 million estate and orchestrate a wedding that would air on live television, shaking an entire family to its core. But for now, I was simply learning how to build. And, for the first time in my life, I finally felt like I mattered. The dream of building something of my own began like a whisper, quiet, fragile, the kind of hope you don't speak aloud because saying it makes it feel too large, too risky, too easy for the world to crush. But once the whisper settled into my chest, it refused to leave. It followed me through long nights in the studio, through cold morning shifts pouring lattes for strangers, through zoning meetings with Alden where he taught me how to read the land itself. Slowly, the dream grew teeth, then bones, then a spine strong enough that I could stand it upright and call it what it was, a plan. I didn't know when the opportunity would come, only that when it did, I couldn't let fear make the decision for me. And then, one rainy afternoon, while scrolling through listings for land plots the same way some people scroll through dresses or jewelry, I saw it. A stretch of acreage tucked somewhere between Denver and the mountains, about 18 acres wide, though the listing rounded it to 20 to make it feel grander. The land was remote, about 30 minutes from the nearest town, and the road leading to it was little more than a gravel spine winding through forest and hill. But the photographs, grainy, poorly lit, probably taken by someone with little patience, still managed to show something impossible. Space, sky, quiet, and a view of the Rockies so breathtaking it looked like a painting slipping into real life. Most buyers would overlook it. Too far. Too inconvenient. Too raw. But I wasn't like most buyers. I didn't want something polished, something pre-approved by someone else's vision. I wanted land with potential, land the world had dismissed, so I could shape it into something undeniable. It felt like finding a piece of myself out there in the wild, waiting to be claimed. The asking price was shockingly low for the acreage. Low because the seller needed to offload it fast. Low because developers weren't interested in building so far from the city. Low because the soil had quirks that required patience. Low because no one imagined something magnificent could ever be built there. I imagined it immediately. My savings, scraped together over years of sacrifices, tips, freelance earnings, bonuses. Alden slipped into my hand with a wink, barely scratched the surface of the price. So, I did something that terrified me. I applied for a loan. My hands trembled as I filled out the forms, imagining every possible way this gamble could lead to disaster. But when the loan was approved, tears spilled down my cheeks before I even realized I was crying. It wasn't the money that moved me. It was the fact that someone, somewhere, believed I was capable of building something worth investing in. On the day I signed the final papers, I drove to the land alone. The sky was wide and blue, the wind crisp enough to sting my face. I stepped into the tall grass, closed my eyes, and listened to the quiet. No voices telling me I wasn't enough. No comparisons. No shadows. Just the sound of breath, wind, and possibility. I sank to my knees and touched the soil, letting it cling to my fingers. For the first time, I owned something no one could belittle. Something no one could take credit for. Something that belonged solely entirely to me. The design process consumed me in the best possible way. I sketched late into the night, filling page after page with ideas until my desk was buried beneath drafts. I wanted something that reflected everything I had gone through: strength, transparency, warmth, solitude, and openness. A home that wasn't just beautiful, but intentional. A home that could hold people one day, welcome laughter one day, and stand as proof that I had never been basic, ordinary, or background. The vision crystallized slowly into a style I came to call Mountain Luxe Contemporary. Cedar wood, warm, aromatic, timeless, would frame the structure. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls would open the house to the mountains, letting light carve quiet stories across the hardwood floors each morning. A great hall with a floating staircase, a space large enough to host gatherings I had never been invited to. A light garden in the center of the estate, an open-air courtyard where nightfall could spill silver across stone and greenery. Behind the house, a man-made pond, small, oval, reflective, designed to catch the colors of sunset and hold them long after the sky dimmed. It was ambitious. Too ambitious, according to every architect who saw my plans. But Alden, with his seasoned calm, flipped through my sketches the same way he had the first time: slowly, reverently. "You're building more than a house," he murmured. "You're building a life." Construction took nearly 3 years. 3 years of muddy boots, zoning inspections, unexpected setbacks, victories that felt like small miracles. 3 years of freezing mornings and scorching afternoons, of standing on scaffolding while tracing lines in the air, imagining what would someday rise from the frame. Some nights I slept in my car on the land because I wanted to be there when the sun rose over the half-built beams. Some nights I drove home exhausted, questioning everything, but then I'd return the next morning and remember why I started. By the time the estate was finished, its value had climbed to $5.5 million, not because I wanted luxury, but because every inch of it was built with intention, precision, and quiet resilience. When I walked through the final structure, cedar breathing warmth from the walls, sunlight pouring through glass panels that framed mountains like artwork, I felt something crack open in my chest. Not pain this time, but relief. Vindication. The kind of peace you only feel when you've spent your whole life underestimated and finally create something that makes underestimation laughable. And I told no one. Not my parents. Not Camilla. Not any cousin who might leak the news back home. I guarded the estate with the same fierceness I once wished someone had used to guard me. It was my sanctuary, my proof, my redemption, and I wasn't going to let the people who had dismissed me for years twist it into something else. As far as my family knew, I was still doing design stuff in Seattle, still living quietly, still ordinary, still basic. It was easier to let them believe that, easier than letting them turn my life's greatest accomplishment into another opportunity to praise Camilla. They had no idea I was building a world they could never overshadow. And one day, they would see it, not because I wanted their approval, but because destiny has a funny way of revealing truths exactly when they're meant to be seen. By the time the estate was complete, a quiet masterpiece tucked into the mountains, a place built from nothing but vision and grit, I had grown used to living alone. Not lonely, just self-contained. My world had shape and purpose, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I didn't need anything from anyone. Least of all love. Love, as I had known it growing up, was conditional and selective and always pointed toward Camilla. It was a performance, not a feeling. So when it arrived in my life for real, I almost didn't recognize it. His name was Ezra. We met at a land use conference outside Denver, where he was consulting on environmental impact models for rural developments. He had the kind of presence you didn't notice immediately, not because it was small, but because it was steady like a warm lamp in the corner of a room. He listened more than he spoke, observed more than he commented, and when he did speak, it wasn't to impress anyone. He wasn't dazzled by loud people or flashy accomplishments. He saw things quietly and deeply, the way I had always hoped someone would see me. We ran into each other 3 more times during the conference, first over bitter hotel coffee, then in a breakout session about sustainable water systems, and once by accident in the lobby, where he noticed I was sketching the curve of a hillside. "You draw land the same way a musician hears sound," he had said, tilting his head as though my lines held a melody only I knew how to play. I should have laughed it off, but his words stayed with me. Over the months that followed, we crossed paths again through work, then by choice. Coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into long drives through the foothills. And somewhere between blueprints and quiet evenings where we cooked noodles together in my tiny kitchen, I realized he was the first man who didn't make me feel like a shadow in my own story. I told him about my past one night under the soft flicker of candles, my voice breaking in places I never let anyone hear. I told him about Camilla, about my parents' obsession with appearances, about the years I spent trying to prove I mattered, about the silence that followed every message I ever sent home. He didn't look away. He didn't pity me. He just listened with the kind of attentiveness people usually reserve for maps when they're lost. When he proposed on a snowy ridge overlooking the valley where I had built my estate, the rings sparkled, but not nearly as brightly as the fear that rushed through me. The first words that left my mouth weren't yes. They weren't even close. "Are you sure you want to tie yourself to someone like me?" I asked, my breath fogging in the cold. "Someone my own parents see as basic." Ezra didn't hesitate. He didn't blink. He didn't laugh or correct me. He said, "You're not basic. You're the foundation everything strong is built on." And just like that, a lifetime of wounds softened, not healed, but softened, the way winter soil softens before spring. We decided to marry the following summer. A simple ceremony, at first, that was genuinely all we wanted: sincerity, warmth, people who loved us for who we were, not who we performed to be. I told Ezra that despite everything, I still wanted to invite my parents and Camilla. Not because they deserved it, but because I needed to offer them the chance to choose me for once. To show up for me for once. To say yes to me for once. So I sent them the invitation myself, a handwritten card, a warm note, a call afterward to make sure they received it. My mother answered, with a tone so flat it could have been a countertop. "So, this is really happening? A small wedding? No ballroom? No hotel? No event planner?" I explained gently that we wanted something intimate, something meaningful, something ours. My father sighed, as though my happiness were an inconvenience. "No distinguished guests? None of Ezra's connections? No corporate leaders? No extended gala? It's a wedding," I said quietly. "Not a networking event." And then Camilla chimed in, voice dripping with the kind of arrogance she wore like perfume. "So, basically a backyard ceremony? That's cute." "Very." "You." I swallowed back the sting. "It would mean a lot if you came." Silence. Then my mother delivered the blow with practiced ease. "We'll sit this one out, sweetheart. The whole thing sounds too basic for our family standards. We'd rather save our time and resources for Camilla's special day someday." They weren't rejecting an event, they were rejecting me. They said it so casually, so cleanly, as if their daughter's wedding was an optional appointment they could cancel. As if everything about me, my love, my work, my life was an accessory that didn't match the outfit they wanted to wear. I inhaled slowly. Then I said only 2 words, "I understand." But in my chest, something ancient and wounded finally, quietly, snapped. I hung up the phone. I stared at the wall for a long time. Ezra found me sitting on the floor, numb, my engagement ring catching bits of fading sunlight. I told him what happened. He didn't say sorry. He didn't try to fix it. He simply held my hands and said, "Then we build something better. Something that reflects you." And that was the moment the plan began. Not a simple ceremony. Not something small. But a wedding worthy of the woman I had spent years becoming. A wedding built on the land I fought for, shaped with my hands, protected with my heart. A wedding they rejected, until the whole world saw it on TV. They had chosen to skip my wedding. They had chosen to dismiss me. They had chosen their golden daughter again. But I was done shrinking. Done being the background. Done letting them write my narrative. So, I took the two words they had thrown at me, too basic, and started shaping the most extraordinary wedding they could never ignore. A celebration that would make the world pause. A moment that would change everything. A union built on love, truth, and a foundation stronger than any spotlight Camilla ever stood under. They said they'd skip my wedding. Fine. But they would still see it. Whether they liked it or not. Once my family turned their backs on my wedding, something inside me unlocked, not spite, not revenge, but a quiet, fierce clarity. If they wouldn't show up, then I would build a celebration for the people who had shown up throughout my life. The ones who offered kindness when my own parents couldn't find the time. The ones who saw me when my family insisted I was invisible. The ones who believed in me long before I believed in myself. And so, in secret, Ezra and I began planning the wedding that wasn't supposed to happen. A wedding born, not from their approval, but from my becoming. We planned everything at night, sitting in the great hall of my estate with blueprints spread across the long cedar table, soft lamps illuminating our faces. Ezra handled logistics with a steady precision I loved him for. I designed the visual world, the garden lights, the floral arch, the arrangement of tables beneath the pines, the placement of lanterns so their glow would reflect off the pond like a constellation. We hired a string quartet whose music could melt even the coldest heart. A local chef whose rustic dishes tasted like home, and a lighting team that specialized in transforming dark forests into fairy tales. No hotel ballroom. No sterile chandeliers. Just authenticity, artistry, and the land I had built my future on. The invitations were the most emotional part. I wrote each one by hand. Some went to friends from Seattle who had seen me walk to work in the rain. Some to coworkers who taught me how to build my first 3D render. Some to elderly neighbors in Denver who brought soup when I was sick. And many to extended relatives, cousins, aunts, uncles who had once been pushed aside by my parents, just as I had been. People who attended weddings, holidays, birthdays, only to feel like extras in Camilla's endless spotlight. Every invitation carried the same handwritten note. "Thank you for seeing me." Words spread faster than I expected. 2 weeks before the ceremony, a producer from a regional TV channel reached out. Their show, Dream Weddings Colorado, was featuring unique weddings across the state and had somehow heard rumors about a spectacular mountaintop ceremony designed by a young architect. He asked if we would consider allowing them to live stream parts of it. Ezra looked at me across the kitchen counter, his brow raised as if asking without words, "Do you want this?" I thought about my parents' voices, the way they dismissed my first invitation, the ease with which they labeled my happiness, too basic. And something inside me steadied. "Yes," I said. "Let them see what basic looks like now." The week of the wedding arrived, and the estate buzzed with life. Florists moved through the grounds like dancers, carrying armfuls of white roses, baby's breath, and mountain greenery. The catering team set up long wooden tables draped with linen, candles secured inside glass cylinders so the wind wouldn't snuff them out. Technicians hung warm golden lights from the trees, the wires invisible, making the entire forest shimmer as if stars had fallen and caught themselves on the branches. The arch, my arch, was the centerpiece. Cedarwood. Fresh blooms. Soft, draping fabric that looked like morning fog. It wasn't gaudy or excessive. It was intentional. Elegant. The kind of beauty that whispered instead of shouted. The morning of the wedding, I woke before sunrise. The estate was silent except for the soft rustle of wind against the glass walls. I stepped outside onto the balcony, wrapped in a robe, and watched as the mountains slowly turned pink. For the first time, I wasn't nervous. I wasn't thinking about who wouldn't be there. I was thinking about who would. About love that chose me. About the girl I used to be, small, unseen, and the woman I had become. By late afternoon, the property transformed into a world I had once only sketched in the margins of notebooks. Guests began arriving early, dressed warmly, wrapped in scarves and excitement. Laughter drifted across the pavilion. Children ran around the courtyard chasing each other. The air smelled like roasted herbs, cedar, and twilight. And the seats, every single one, were filled. There were no empty rows. No awkward gaps. People stood along the edges, hands tucked into pockets, eyes glowing as they took in the view. My heart thudded harder with every new arrival. This was the opposite of the childhood where chairs for me were afterthoughts. This time, I wasn't squeezed into the edge of a celebration, I was at the center of it. As dusk settled, the outdoor lights clicked on one by one. A soft golden glow flooded the garden. The quartet tuned their violins. Producers prepped their cameras discreetly along the perimeter. And then, at the exact moment my wedding coordinator raised her radio to her ear, the live stream began. The title card flashed across screens across Colorado. A breathtaking wedding at a private $5.5M mountain estate. And, miles away, in my small hometown, televisions flickered on. Neighbors paused. Church groups murmured. Restaurants turned up the volume. Phones buzzed. Screenshots went flying. And in my parents' living room where my childhood certificate once lay forgotten under mail, my family watched in shock. They recognized the estate they'd never seen. They recognized the wedding they had refused to attend. They recognized me, a version of me they had never imagined possible. I stood at the top of the cedar staircase, veil brushing against my arm, the lights catching on the beating of my gown. The music swelled. A hush fell over the guests. And for the first time in my entire life, I felt eyes on me, not because someone needed a comparison to Camilla, not because someone wanted to diminish me, but because I had created something worthy of being seen. I took my first step, then another, and another. Each one steady. Each one mine. I wasn't basic. I wasn't background. I wasn't the forgotten daughter. I was the architect of this moment. The woman who built her own foundation. The bride walking into a future she created with her own hands. And somewhere far away, my parents watched it happen live on television. The morning after the wedding, sunlight filtered through the estate's glass walls in soft golden stripes, warming the hardwood floors and settling over the remnants of the most magical night of my life. Scattered rose petals, half-emptied champagne flutes, ribbons tangled gently in the breeze drifting from an open door. I was still barefoot, still in my silk robe, still glowing from the warmth of everything that had happened, when my phone began buzzing again and again on the kitchen counter. At first, I thought it was congratulatory messages from guests. But when I picked up the phone, I saw a flood of numbers from Indiana, unknown numbers, old neighbors, distant relatives, even people I hadn't spoken to since grade school. Message after message poured in. Links to the live stream, screenshots of my estate, photos of the ceremony, questions, exclamation points, disbelief. One message simply read, "Is this really you?" Another, "Your parents must be so proud, this wedding was incredible." Another, "Your mom bragged about Camilla's photo shoot but didn't mention this." My stomach tightened, not with fear, but with inevitability. The truth was out. The facade my parents had built that I was the basic, forgettable daughter had cracked so violently that the sound traveled across state lines. Across town, while I was still rubbing sleep from my eyes, my parents' quiet, carefully curated world began to split open. At 9:14 a.m., my hometown neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, a woman who loved gossip as much as she loved her rose garden, sent my mother a message she couldn't ignore. "Susan, is this your daughter?" Attached was a screenshot from the TV broadcast. Me descending the cedar staircase, gown shimmering like moonlight. The words $5.5M private mountain estate wedding stamped across the bottom. My parents had always controlled the narrative about me. They chose the version of me that served them, the quiet one, the unremarkable one, the daughter who made Camilla shine brighter by standing behind her. They repeated that story until they believed it themselves. So when the image hit them, it was not just surprise, it was rupture. My mother reportedly dropped her phone onto the kitchen counter, her face draining of color. My father stared at the screen like it was a bad joke he couldn't quite grasp. Camilla, still in pajamas, grabbed the phone and zoomed in, her eyes widening with something far uglier than shock. It was jealousy, sharpened into rage. She stole my moment. She shouted, loud enough that half the block probably heard. Her wedding was trending on Twitter. People are talking about her. They're supposed to talk about me. My father tried to regain composure, but anger flickered beneath his skin like a struck match. "Since when does she have an estate?" he demanded. "She works in design." She barely gets by. Where would she get millions of dollars? Who gave her that money? My mother clamped a hand over her mouth, breath trembling like she was trying to process a death in the family. No. No, this can't be right. She didn't tell us anything. Why didn't she tell us? Why would she hide this? Camilla scoffed sharply. Because she wanted to humiliate us. On TV. She planned this. She wants attention. She wants to look better than me. She thinks she's special now? She thinks she's more important? There it was. The real wound. The real fear. The daughter they called background had stepped into the spotlight without permission. By noon, their panic had transformed into something more controlled, more dangerous. A need to reassert dominance. My father paced the living room, fingers tapping against his phone screen. "We need to fix this," he muttered. "People are asking questions. They're tagging us. They think we weren't invited. They think we ignored her wedding." Camilla chimed in, bitterness dripping from every word. "We have to get ahead of this. Before it gets worse. Before people think she is more successful than me." That was their nightmare. Not my happiness. Not my independence. But the idea of losing control of the story they had written about me for 3 decades. At 4:03 p.m., my father finally typed the message I knew deep down was coming. Family meeting. 8 p.m. Urgent. Bring your husband. This is serious. No congratulations. No apology. No acknowledgement that they had chosen to skip my wedding. Just an order, disguised as concern. I stared at the text, feeling the familiar sting of command of being summoned like a problem that needed fixing. Ezra glanced over my shoulder as I read it. He didn't say anything at first, but his hand found mine, steady and warm. "What do you want to do?" he asked. I didn't answer immediately. Old habits still tugged at me, the instinct to show up obediently, to apologize for existing too loudly, to shrink myself so they could stand taller. But something in me had shifted last night. Something that had been building for years beneath the surface finally held solid ground. "They don't want a meeting," I said quietly. "They want control." Ezra nodded. "Then maybe it's time you show them who they're dealing with." For the first time, I felt the truth settle deeply within me. I wasn't going to this meeting as the girl they dismissed. I wasn't stepping back into their house as the forgotten daughter. I was walking in as the woman who built acres of land into a legacy, who curated a wedding for hundreds, whose happiness no longer depended on crumbs of validation. I typed back a single message. "We'll be there." Not because they demanded it, but because I was ready. Ready to confront the family who tried to erase me. Ready to challenge the narrative they had crafted for years. Ready to let their world collapse under the weight of the truth they never bothered to ask. Tonight, they wanted to put me back in my place. But tonight, I would show them I had built a new one. And it stood higher than they ever expected. The drive back to Indiana felt different this time. Not heavy, not fearful, simply inevitable. Ezra sat beside me, his hand resting gently over mine as highway lights flickered across the windshield. I wasn't returning as the daughter desperate for approval. I wasn't returning as the invisible one. This time, I was walking into their house as a woman who had built her own world literally. But the closer we got to my parents' neighborhood, the more familiar shadows of old memories brushed against me. Childhood dinners where I was ignored, holidays where I was an accessory, Camilla's endless spotlight, the feeling of being small even when I wasn't. By the time we pulled up to the house, dusk had fallen. Through the windows, I could already see them, my father, sitting stiffly on the armchair, my mother perched upright on the couch, Camilla leaning back with her arms crossed, wearing a look that told me she had already written the script for tonight, and I was expected to follow it. The three of them sat aligned, silent, as if waiting for a trial to begin. And I, apparently, was the defendant. Ezra squeezed my hand. "You don't owe them a performance," he murmured. That was all I needed to hear. When we entered, not one of them stood to greet us. Not a smile, not a word of congratulations. My wedding ring, still gleaming on my finger, might as well have been invisible. They let the silence stretch until it wrapped tight around the room. Finally, my father spoke, voice cold and clipped. "Sit." Ezra and I remained standing. My mother exhaled sharply, clearly irritated. This isn't a negotiation. It's a family matter. Ezra's voice was steady. We'll stand. The slightest tremor flickered across my mother's face at being challenged, but she forced a tight smile, turning her attention to me instead. Well, she said, we saw your event. Camilla chimed in before I could respond. Yeah. Your spectacle. Out of nowhere, without including your own family. Her lips curled. Do you realize how humiliated we were when neighbors asked why we weren't invited? My father jabbed a finger toward his phone on the table. We have received over 80 texts. People think you deliberately tried to make us look bad. And did you? Camilla demanded. I inhaled slowly. I did invite you. My mother waved her hand dismissively. Oh, please. A casual invitation to some backyard gathering. It wasn't casual. I cut in. And it wasn't a backyard gathering. She froze mid-sentence, as if offended that I interrupted the script. My father leaned forward, voice rising. Enough. You blindsided this family. You hosted an extravagant wedding, an estate, cameras, hundreds of guests, and didn't give us a chance to prepare or respond. You blindsided everyone. I stared at him in disbelief. You had a chance. I asked you to be there. You said my wedding was too basic for your standards. A flash of discomfort crossed my mother's face, but Camilla was quicker, her bitterness exploding. You tricked us. You wanted us to think it was small, so you could make us look like the bad guys. I blinked. You really believe everything revolves around you, don't you? Camilla shot up from the couch. You embarrassed me. Ezra took a step closer to me. How does someone else's happiness embarrass you? My father slammed his palm onto the table. Enough. The sound echoed through the house. For a moment, even the air seemed to stop. He pointed at me, jaw tight. You are going to fix this mess. Immediately. My mother nodded, folding her hands primly. You will write a public apology, saying your wedding was a private choice and that it does not represent our family's values. Camilla added, and say you regret excluding us. I didn't exclude you. No, my mother snapped. But that's not what the community thinks. People are talking. They're assuming we don't love you, that we don't support you, that we're cold. My father leaned back, eyes narrowing. We won't have you damage our reputation. Then, slowly, precisely, he laid out their demands. You will post a public statement tonight. You will say your wedding's extravagance was a misunderstanding. You will say you're sorry for causing confusion. You will clarify that it doesn't reflect the upbringing we gave you. And you will assure everyone that you respect your family. My mother added, word it carefully. Something like, I apologize for embarrassing my family. Our values are modest, and my wedding did not reflect that. And, Camilla said, smirking, make sure to write that you're grateful to be part of a family like ours. I looked at each of them, one by one. Slowly. The people who had ignored my milestones. The people who called me basic. The people who skipped the most important day of my life because it didn't serve their image. The people who now wanted to use my success to repair their reputation. A strange calm washed over me, not weakness, not fear, but clarity. No, I said simply. The room stilled. My father frowned. Excuse me? No, I repeated, louder this time. I'm not apologizing. My mother leaned forward, voice dripping with condescension. You don't understand. This isn't about you. This is about the family. No, I said again. This has always been about you. About your image. About Camilla, about the narrative you're desperate to maintain. Camilla scoffed. What narrative? That I'm the forgettable one, I said. The quiet one. The basic one. The daughter you can dismiss and reshape however you want. My father's voice sharpened. You will do as you're told. Ezra spoke then, calm but firm. She's an adult. She doesn't owe you a performance. My mother glared at him like he had committed a crime. We didn't raise her to disrespect us. Ezra answered softly. You didn't raise her at all. And that was the breaking point. My father stood up, face red, fists clenched. You will write that apology, or what? I asked quietly. He stopped. For the first time, he had no answer ready. I took a step forward, my voice steady, unwavering. I'm not apologizing for building a life you never cared about. I'm not apologizing for loving someone you never bothered to know. I'm not apologizing for celebrating with the people who showed up for me. I'm not apologizing for refusing to shrink so Camilla can shine. My mother shook her head in disbelief. You're being dramatic. No, I said gently. I'm being honest. Then I delivered the words that had been growing inside me for years. You don't get to control my story anymore. Silence swallowed the room. For the first time in my life, they were the ones who didn't know what to say. And for the first time, I didn't shrink. I didn't tremble. I didn't apologize. I stood there, fully not basic. Not background, not invisible. Finally myself. For a long moment after my refusal, the room hung in a stunned, frozen silence. It felt almost unreal. My parents, the people who had dictated every narrative of my life, were speechless. Because I finally spoke in my own voice, without shaking. Without apologizing. Without shrinking. Ezra stood quietly beside me, a steady presence, while the rest of the family relatives who had been quietly invited to this so-called family meeting shifted uneasily on the chairs they were told to fill. My aunt, Margaret. My uncle Henry. Even my grandmother's sister. People who had witnessed my childhood from the sidelines, powerless then, but attentive now. My mother was the first to recover. She straightened her blouse, forced composure back onto her face, and said sharply, "Enough. This behavior is unacceptable. You will not raise your voice at us in front of relatives." I didn't raise my voice. I simply stopped lowering it. For the first time in my life, I said calmly, "I'm speaking with the volume I should have used decades ago." My father scowled. "You're making a fool of yourself. Sit down." "No," I replied, just as calm. "I'm done sitting down." A ripple ran through the room. My mother's face reddened. Camilla rolled her eyes dramatically, muttering under her breath, "Here we go again. Playing the victim." I turned toward her, meeting her gaze directly for once. "You know what? I'm not the victim, I was the forgotten one. That's different." Her lips tightened, ready to fire back, but I raised my hand not to silence her, but to finally claim the floor they had monopolized for years. "You want the truth?" I said. "Fine. Let's start with this." I reached into my bag and placed a sealed white envelope on the table. Then another. Then a third. They looked confused. I kept my voice level. "These," I said, "are copies of the wedding invitations I sent you. The ones where I told you how much it would mean if you were there. The ones you dismissed as too basic." A quiet gasp came from someone behind me, my Aunt Margaret. I continued, "You didn't skip my wedding because it was small. You skipped it because you assumed it wasn't worth your time." My mother stood abruptly. "That's not true. You gave us almost no details. It sounded cheap." "So cheap," I echoed, "that you didn't bother to ask anything at all." Camilla muttered, "You're twisting it. You should have told us it was going to be live-streamed. You should have told us it was going to be extravagant." I looked straight at her. "You didn't come because you thought it was beneath you. Not because you lacked information. Let's not rewrite what happened." Her face reddened, anger mixing with embarrassment. When my father opened his mouth to argue, I placed the next item onto the table, a thick folder, printed with legal seals and architectural watermarks. "This," I said, "is the deed to my estate. The one you're all so shocked I own." A murmur swept through the room. My father's eyes darted across the documents, disbelief twisting his features. "Where did you get this kind of money?" "I earned it," I said simply. "Every dollar. Every loan payment. Every blueprint. Every sleepless night." My mother sputtered. "Why didn't you tell us?" "Because you never asked," I replied. "And because you decided long ago that Camilla was the shining star, and I was the— what was it? Background? Basic?" No one breathed. I stepped closer to the table, my voice steady but shaking at the edges with emotion I refused to swallow anymore. "And one more thing." I pulled out the last paper, a printed list of names. Not celebrities. Not influencers. Not the kind of people my parents liked to parade around to boost their image, just real people. People who helped me. People who believed in me. People who showed up. These, I said quietly, placing the list down, are the guests who attended my wedding. Not for the estate, not for a spectacle, not for status. For me, because they saw me. They supported me. They loved me. I turned to face my parents fully. Not one person on this list ever treated me like trash. Not one person on this list ever compared me to Camilla. Not one person on this list ever told me I was basic. Camilla jumped in, voice shrill. You're being dramatic. You should correct yourself. You're not supposed to shine more than me. You're making this whole thing about outdoing me. I stared at her for a moment, truly stared, and for the first time, I didn't see the glamorous younger sister who had everything handed to her. I saw a girl terrified of losing her role as the family's golden child. My voice softened, but my words did not. I'm not surpassing you. I'm simply walking out of the shadow you were placed in front of me. I'm not racing you. I'm not competing with you. I'm not trying to take your spotlight. I inhaled slowly. I'm just finally standing in my own. A pin could have dropped in that room, and it would have sounded like thunder. My mother's mouth opened and closed, searching for a comeback that didn't exist. My father's face drained of color. Camilla looked like she had swallowed ice. And then, unexpectedly, someone stood up. It was my Aunt Margaret, quiet, gentle, always polite Aunt Margaret, whose eyes were now shimmering with anger that wasn't directed at me. She pointed at my parents, voice trembling with emotion. She's right, she said. All of it. This girl grew up believing she was nothing because you made her believe it. She begged for scraps of attention while you poured everything into Camilla. She built everything she has from dust, and you still expect her to bow down to your pride. My Uncle Henry rose next, nodding firmly. She didn't embarrass this family. You did. And then, the softest voice of all, my grandmother's sister, old but fiercely clear, whispered, "She's not wrong. She's brave. And for the first time, she isn't lying to herself." I felt something break open in my chest, something old and rotted finally letting go. My parents stood frozen, not in anger now, but in shock. Utter, undeniable shock. For the first time in my entire life, the truth wasn't silenced. The truth wasn't minimized. The truth wasn't twisted. For the first time, they were the ones without power. And I finally felt free. When Ezra and I finally walked out of my parents' house that night, the air outside felt different, colder, cleaner, almost startling in its clarity. Behind us, the living room remained frozen in a stunned, choking silence. My mother pale and speechless, my father gripping the armchair as if it were the last shred of authority he had left, and Camilla staring at the floor like the world had tilted in a direction she couldn't control. I didn't slam the door. I didn't storm out. I simply left. And, for the first time in my life, I did not feel guilty for choosing myself. In the days that followed, something remarkable happened. They went completely silent. Not the angry silence they used to use as punishment, but a different kind. A silence born from the realization that they no longer had power over me. No more guilt trips. No more lectures. No more commands disguised as family values. Just silence. And in that silence, something inside me finally exhaled. Back at the estate, the mountains welcomed me home like an embrace. The floor-to-ceiling windows reflected a version of me that felt true, a woman who built her life from dirt and determination, a woman who no longer needed to beg for a seat at someone else's table. Ezra brewed coffee while sunlight spilled across the cedar floors, and as I looked out at the pine trees swaying gently in the wind, I felt something I had chased for decades without knowing its name: peace. A week after the confrontation, the first knock came at the estate gate. Then another. Then more. Relatives who had sat quietly during the family meeting began to show up, not out of curiosity, but out of warmth. Out of recognition. Out of quiet solidarity they'd been too afraid to show for years. My Aunt Margaret was the first to visit. She brought a basket of fresh baked bread and jars of homemade jam. "I should have stood up for you sooner," she whispered as we hugged. Then my Uncle Henry. Then cousins who said they always admired me but didn't know how to speak against the family hierarchy. Even neighbors from Indiana who happened to be vacationing in Colorado stopped by, laughing, and saying they had always wondered why my parents talked only about Camilla. Soon, the estate once built from loneliness became a home filled with people, voices, memories, and laughter. We hosted small dinner gatherings under the string lights. We grilled food on the patio while kids ran across the grass, chasing fireflies near the pond. People brought flowers, home-cooked dishes, stories, and gratitude. They didn't care about spectacle. They didn't care about the estate's value. They cared that they were welcomed, that they were seen, that they belonged. And for the first time in my life, so did I. One evening, after everyone had left and the music had faded into the soft hum of nighttime cicadas, I stood in the great hall, and my throat tightened as I took in the long cedar table lined with empty chairs. Chairs still warm from the people who chose to sit with me. Chairs that once symbolized everything I had been denied in childhood. I thought of all those years I spent fighting for a place at my parents' dinner table, begging for attention, hoping for praise, wanting to be seen. I thought of the countless holidays where my name was overlooked, the birthdays where Camilla blew out candles on cakes meant for both of us, the nights where I watched my parents brag about her achievements while mine were brushed aside like dust. And without meaning to, I whispered into the quiet hall. I used to beg for a chair at their table. My voice caught, but only for a moment. Now I've built an entire banquet hall, and I give those seats to people who actually deserve to sit with me. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't triumph. It was liberation. A shedding of skin. A final, gentle acceptance that I didn't need the people who once refused to see me, because I had learned to see myself. As months passed, the silence from my parents and Camilla remained unbroken. No calls. No messages. Not even a passive-aggressive holiday card. They chose pride over reconciliation, image over truth, appearance over family, and I let them. Because sometimes walking away isn't punishment, it's protection. One night, sitting on the back deck under a sky full of stars, Ezra placed his hand over mine and asked softly, "Do you ever miss them?" I nodded. Sometimes. But I don't miss who they were. I miss who I wanted them to be. He kissed my forehead. "That version never existed," he said. "I know," I whispered. "And I'm learning to let that go." The truth was simple. Some families never love you the way you deserve. But life always gives you another chance to build a new one. And so, I did. Now, when I walk through the estate, I no longer see the long nights of construction or the ache of solitude. I see possibilities. I see gatherings. I see warmth. I see the life I created with my own hands, shaped not from bitterness, but from rebirth. To anyone listening to my story now, to anyone who has ever felt like the forgotten one, the basic one, the afterthought in their own home, I say this with every ounce of truth in me. You do not exist to earn your family's approval. You do not exist to make them proud. You do not exist to uphold the image they want to project. You exist to build a life where you are seen, where you are loved, where you are valued, and where the table is big enough for everyone who truly cares. If they can't see your worth, don't dim yourself. Build your own home, your own table, your own family, your own life, and let the people who once silenced you sit forever in the echo of their own empty seats.